Yeah, I think the specification side of it is a real key area that people are starting to address. I kind of always see, if you just classify services as one huge area, defining the requirement is always going to be difficult because it's much more intangible. And actually measuring what you got for your money, measuring value, measuring performance is far more difficult. Because again, the process is not a linear process necessarily. It can change along the way in the delivery of those services. And that's where stuff is not really, by most organizations, getting measured. So I think services procurement is, by its very nature, is complicated in a different way to the complication around the supply chain of goods and materials. That's complicated as well, but that's very much a solved problem, and it feels more linear. Whereas, yeah, the services is more intangible, as I said. But another thing about services, which I find quite interesting, is it's a question of who owns it, who owns the problem, in the sense that most organizations don't think in terms of services procurement. They'll think in terms of categories, or they'll think in terms of direct versus indirect. Depending on what sector that organization is, indirect could end up being mainly goods. If they're a, I don't know, construction consultancy, could be good not for resale. Whereas their direct could all be services, effectively, if they're providing consulting, and subcontracting that out. Vice versa, in a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, say the majority would be big manufacturing organization. Their direct spend is mainly goods and materials. Their indirect has a predominance towards services. So it very much depends. But so I always tend to look at it on a category basis. And I think about complex services categories like IT services, consulting, legal, marketing, professional services, like that. So it's one of those areas where it's quite often a question of who owns that problem, because it's a complicated problem for organizations to solve. But who within that organization, and this is where we can come on to the kind of procurement excellence, center of excellence, that sort of side of things. Because I think for organizations, it's one of those things that sometimes they'll look at it and think it's too complicated for us to solve, to go into that level of detail required, where they've got a big source to pay platform, for example, that will be handling it very well at the PO level. But in terms of being able to go below the PO level effectively to the level of the statement of work is very challenging. How do you see that kind of ownership of that problem within organizations?
Well, this is an interesting one, to be honest. And, looking back at some of the latest work I did at one of the large pharmaceuticals, this was one of the spots which kept us very busy, right? Because you had a policy which was asking for contracting of services above a certain clip level, right? Which was then meaning that you had to really set up SOWs for all of your service partners, and you had to as well be thinking around rate cards and as well some of the, let's say, details of how you would be actually pricing up together with your supplier some of the work, right? And normally within the services space, what you'll find is that there is quite a collaborative aspect of work needed, right? So there's a collaboration between the teams which are owning, let's say, the end result of the services, if you want. For instance, if you're talking about marketing, you may have teams in there which understand totally well how agency work gets actually conducted, right? Not just how you tender and then actually award work to an agency, but as well how an agency works itself. And then you can construct with that as well better SOWs, which will then help you then as well within the procurement space to execute, right? From my perspective, it's almost like a good way to get hold of this problem is to make sure that you do have representatives within the category space almost embedded as part of these functions, where services are becoming really a big need, and where there are the sweet spots of the organization. As I was just saying, in pharma, for instance, right? Marketing services, very, very important. Meeting and travels and events, very, very important, right? You have the necessity to almost build up your own center of excellence as well within that space, to not just necessarily design how you want to go about it for your external customers, but then as well how you organize for it internally as well, and how you procure the services going with it in a way which is going to help you then as well to have an advantage, right? So from that perspective, building up these center of excellence views, right? Either within these different functions, within marketing, within meeting and travels, with an implanted procurement person, or bringing this into the center of excellence of procurement itself with best practices built up in there for your category buyers to better understand as well how to approach the stakeholders and how to go about the suppliers may be helpful as well, right? So the way I saw that working in my last company was really having these almost implanted implanted organizations, right, where you would have a procurement representative being part of the meeting and travel activities, quite embedded in there, with a reporting line into procurement, but with a strong focus as well on making sure that the services were, organized, SOW'd or contracted within the right structure, and then as well being provided for execution as well with the right level of detail, so that execution would really happen well, right? So I think you can't really give it to one or the other. It is a collaborative effort between both functions, and how you then solve that organization, it may depend on the organization. What I've seen working is the model I was just describing.